But in our business of seals, well, we breed seahorses. Of course, they're not normally in the mass groupings that we have in our tanks. This is the Tasmanian potbelly seahorse. It's one of the biggest seahorses. They're females there with a couple of young ones hanging off the head of one of them. And we breed them en masse, but normally they're not occurring in mass groupings like that. And it's an unnatural environment, of course. There's one of our tanks. It's not the best picture, but it gives you the idea that we've got some thousands of seahorses in a tank. They don't normally occur in tanks. They don't normally occur inside. We've got false lighting and all that sort of thing there. So it's unnatural conditions. Now, the diseases that we can get in these seahorses usually result from the conditions that they prefer not being met. So, for example, at one stage we had some of our equipment break down and the temperature of the tanks that they prefer was exceeded, and they became susceptible to a viral disease, and we had deaths. Now, this doesn't occur a lot, I've got to say, in our farm, but it does occur sometimes, especially if we have breakdowns and there's unusually hot weather, for example, and our equipment can't keep the temperatures down. So that's when they become more susceptible. And in a fallen world, as we've been talking, that's when we get the conditions that aren't ideal as they were in the original good created world. So we see that in a number of ways. Now, in my former life, I was a forester and dealt with the growth of trees, and particularly for timber purposes. And this is a pest, the Syrex wood wasp, of particularly pine trees, and it's a big problem in Tasmania and throughout plantations in Australia. It's a wasp that lays eggs in trees or on the trees, and then the larvae end up boring into the tree, and a fungus associated with that then basically destroys the water intake and the nutrient intakes of trees. So it's a real pest, but it really only occurs in trees that are under stress. So plantations are, again, mass cultures, monocultures, and they can be planted very densely. And as they grow, they can be under stress just by the competition of the trees in close proximity to each other. So the Syrex wood wasp will attack the weaker trees that are under duress. And I'm not saying that's necessarily something that didn't happen in the good created world. Plants aren't, I don't think, like animals in terms of suffering, and plants need to be thinned out in some way at some point. So maybe in the good world, the trees that were not doing as well as their neighbours might be attacked by these things, because the wood wasp only attacks the stressed trees. So it's all about balance. Is it a result of a degraded world after the fall? Well, possibly to some extent, as we plant mass cultures of trees that aren't really that natural. And so trees growing on poor sites or in areas that they're not normally found in are more susceptible to it. So under stress, it can be due to lack of moisture intake, the soil types they're growing on, or, as I said, in too high a density. So there's problems with mass monocultures, and actually in some of the books that I've been looking at with this and studying is that maintaining diversity in an environment can really help reduce the impact of insect pests. Apart from, using chemical treatments, which I guess are unnatural and not required in a good, perfect, created world.